This here is the ThinkPad 850. This is a Power PC laptop made by IBM. The purpose of this here was to make IBM's RS-6000 portable, and this was their solution. And it's kind of enormous, but it's also really, really, really beautiful. And that was a big thing with a lot of RISC workstations at the time. The hardware is amazing. Like, the designers were absolutely top-notch on this stuff here. But while they could make amazingly nice-looking hardware, the software side of things was usually kind of dull. I'm not going to lie that I have a fair number of products from the likes of Sun Microsystems, IBM, HP, and DEC Compaq. They're visually beautiful machines, but the Unix underpinnings are really not all that great. And in fact, they stayed kind of static, while in the PC architecture, they were doing some pretty great leaps and bounds. This here is the ThinkPad 380D. This here uses the Pentium processor and runs your selection of MS-DOS, Microsoft Windows, or IBM's OS/2 operating system. It is significantly cheaper than the 850, and there's a far larger variety of software for it. And this is just one unfortunate thing that we're going to be seeing here, is that while you could make amazing RISC workstations, and you could make them relatively fast and not that much physically different dimension-wise than what you were also undermining yourself with, they had to bring the cost down somewhere to make these systems compete with these systems. In the early 90s, Sun Microsystems would have systems like this. This is the SPARC Station IPC. It runs on their own SPARC architecture, and this is called the 411 lunchbox form factor because it looks like a lunchbox. It is amazingly small. You can stand on top of this. Don't actually stand on top of these. But you can place a monitor on top of one of these, and it'll support most of the weight of the monitor. You have a floppy drive on the front of it, and on the back, you actually have an impressive amount of expandability. This also was several $1,000s. This was not all that competitive when compared to a PC, but in the early 90s, the PC was still pretty slow, so this could actually still compete against the bigger leagues from Hewlett-Packard and IBM. But by the year 2000, this was no longer price competitive at all. And they had to do something about that. And there were products in between. I'm going to use the Ultra 60 here, for example. But we're going to go a little bit newer. And while I love this whole frog design thing that they were going on with, they were going to go away with that because they had to make something that was cheaper to stay competitive. Java wasn't going to save them. I guarantee you of that. This is the Blade 100 from Sun Microsystems. This is the very cost-reduced model of their Blade series machines that began to enter the market in the year 2001 and the year 2002. There's actually a fair number of sacrifices Sun had to make in order to bring costs down that went into this machine. And you know what? For the most part, I guess it wasn't that bad. Well, until you hit performance, at which point you realized cost reduction also went down to the CPU level. So it's not a fast machine, but if you needed SPARC, here you were. Base models of this machine started at $995 and went up from there. Sure, so it was under $1,000. That's actually quite competitive. But the quality of the machine definitely took a nosedive. The first thing here, you can get this with a CRT. That was a good, cheap option. This has an LCD on it. This LCD is 1280 by 1024, and even though it says Sun Microsystems on it, it's actually manufactured by Samsung. So it's a fairly standard Samsung display going on in here. Not that that's anything special either, because Sony had been manufacturing CRT units for Sun and every other vendor pretty much at that time as well. But it's VGA. We'll get back to that. The keyboard is probably one of the flimsiest things I've ever had to work with. This is fantastic. It's the Type 6 USB. It is amazingly cost reduced to the point, like it's flexible. It is amazingly flexible. Like, it's creaky, it's nasty. I don't care about key switches, okay? But the build quality of this otherwise is garbage. And you also may notice why it's got these two like horrible yellow gerbil teeth colored keys here. Yeah, this has actually been rebuilt from 3 separate Type 6 keyboards. Like, this thing is just that kind of crap. And these were the only 2 keys I could find because you push on these and slam on these too hard, the keys themselves are brittle. They just dissolve and fall apart. And it's not a great keyboard, but it was cheap. So I guess it was something that you could bundle with your machine. The mouse is a pretty typical 3-button mouse. This one here is pretty badly yellowed, but it was really the only thing I can get. It's a ball mouse. That's fine. Ball mice were still a thing back then. Optical mice weren't coming in. Sun Microsystems part. There's really not much to say about it. It's a mouse that's 3-button. Oh, right. Both the keyboard and the mouse are USB as well. Finally, we come to the CPU itself. Gone are the days of the frog design language that was going on, that was like kind of like popular amongst Sun in its early 90s days, going all the way back to the Sun 3 even. Now it's all curved. It's got this new gray color here. They're still using that kind of like purplish gray on top. The Sun Microsystems logo on the front here. You do have a CD drive on the front of it. You also have a floppy drive down here, and you also have a smart card reader. Smart cards were this thing that began popping up much more in the 90s, and the idea here is we're not talking about banking transactions. We're talking about 2-factor user authentication. Anyone can have a username or password, but only one person, technically, could have the smart card to use to validate who is logging in is, in fact, you. And it wasn't just the Blade 100 that had it. This is the Sunray 1. This is a network appliance that was also sold by Sun Microsystems. Quite simply, it is a complete net booting terminal with VGA and video input and a built-in power supply. It gives you a remote X session and would boot off of one of Sun's other systems. I have an Enterprise 3000 which would boot one of these systems up. But it also has a smart card in it. And again, you can use your username and password to log in with that and then validate yourself with the smart card. You can then log out of this, take your card, come over to your Blade 100, plug that in the front, enter in your username and password, you're validated and you'll be logged in. Pretty much anything you can do and that is accessible in the Sunray 1, you can also do on the Blade 100. Now, if we look at the back of the system, we get to see even more of the cost-cutting measures that Sun was trying to put into this to make it a little bit more affordable. This time, you see we have a more standard variety of ports on there. We have our standard parallel port. We have a standard serial port. No more of this DIN stuff going on. We have our standard audio connections in and out right here. We have VGA. So no more 13W3, like we can use standard monitors on this. And because it has USB for your peripherals, a USB KVM, which also supports VGA, now you can use those on there without needing any sort of adapters or proprietary nonsense to make that work. So that was technically less hardware now you had to buy if you wanted to use these in a large environment. You also received built-in 10100 networking on RJ45. And for some reason, we have FireWire built into this. FireWire was great when this came out because it would have still been USB 1 and USB 2 was still being finalized. FireWire would have been considerably faster than the USB that was in here. But that I can tell there's no software that's bundled with this system that takes advantage of it. Again, owing to the fact, like I said, all these Unix workstations have great looking hardware, terrible software. The other thing that I'm noticing here is that we have an extra set of connectors in here. There's PCI slots inside of this thing. That was not new for Sun, but what is new for Sun is those 2 boards in there. Don't worry, we're going to come back to those in a moment. Now, if I move the Sunray 1 out of the way, nice seeing you again. I'll put you back on your shelf. We open the unit up, and inside, it's even more cost reduction. There we go. So The reality is the CD drive that is in here, and even the hard drive that's in here as well, which in typical Sun fashion is this neat little removable caddy on the side here, this is all IDE, so no more SCSI. SCSI was high performance, but this was, like I mentioned with the CPU before, a low performance machine. So IDE is totally at home with this. We are also now using standard PC 133 SD RAM, which was still kind of expensive, but considerably cheaper considering that Sun's previous products were using proprietary RAM DIMMs. This looks like a Socket 7 CPU in here. It is not. This is the SPARC 2 CPU hiding underneath there at 500 megahertz. But we do have a Rage XL chipset over here. And then again, we have this giant board that's living over here. I need to borrow a screwdriver for a second. So I'll take that. And I'm going to take this one screw here, and I'll take that out, and I'm going to push this here to retract this retainer. This PCI card, if you look at it from the top down, the first thing you may notice is that we have DIMM slots right here. You may also notice there's a CPU socket here as well. The reality is this fancy PCI card is not a remote management card. This is an entire PC. This is the Sun PCi card. This was Sun's strange attempt to bridge the gap between their RISC Unix workstations and the PC world, which was still rapidly gaining and passing them in every way and manner. This board could be plugged into your Blade 100, and sure, you do have a full Solaris install right here. You can run DOS or even Windows off of this card, and it provides you all the physical I/O you need to run an entire PC here. I'm pretty sure this is also, by the way, like either a PCI slot or an ISA slot that's in a weird proprietary connector. And you don't even need the VGA port on the back of this here. The drivers and software that Sun provides with this card allows this to display whatever's running within your X Windows session. Don't worry, we're going to get back to this one here. Remember what I said about this software not being all that great. Finally, the other thing about this here, it's strange, because if you look at some of the jumpers here, can I zoom in on this a bit better? We have ALI chipsets here. We do have some Sun chipsets hiding around here, but you start looking at some of the jumpers in here, and you see like Hummingbird CPU if all of the jumpers are open, but if you all short JP5, it becomes x86 debug board. I see. Why on earth is that x86 debug board? The reality is what's happening here is that this is a strange form factor that wasn't used exclusively by Sun Microsystems. And in fact, to remove the motherboard, that's all there is. And you just have this enormous edge connector at the bottom, which lets you plug in another board. So Sun was doing something weird here. I haven't found a lot of information about this, but obviously the Hummingbird board, as they call this here, had an x86 evaluation board that could switch into its place. Okay, that goes in, the lever locks it. You know what's also interesting about this? Sure, you may notice right here, I've already done the battery modification and added a CR2032 on top of the NVRAM, but there's a second CR2032 right on the motherboard itself. Why? Why? There's already there. The clock's running in here, isn't it? What's that one doing? So you have your 3 PCI slots, which are hiding over here, and you have a little bit more expansion. But other than that, there's nothing else to it. It's basically a PC that's been converted to SPARC, that I can tell. Well, that pretty much does it for the hardware, because we were getting to that point where the hardware was so standardized and so commoditized, I can't really show you anything else. You know what that means? I really have no choice now. I have to show you the software. Okay, before we go any further on this, we have to stop. You're about to watch some screen recordings which aren't necessarily all that great. So before you go and complain down in the comments that it doesn't look all that great, that's a budget restriction. This here is an OptiBase VGA capture pod. VGA on one side, USB on the other. This is actually a first generation Epiphan VGA to USB adapter. I mean, they're revolutionary and it's a nice little tiny pod here instead of like complicated capture cards and stuff like that, but it's still pretty primitive. So you get low frame rates and it's interlaced video. I'm sorry, I can't afford a more modern VGA to USB pod which can do all of that on the fly with no problems and a nice high frame rate. Anyways, back onto the video. Okay, so I've now gone and I've reassembled the whole system. I've plugged everything in and I've got a screen capture unit plugged in with the monitor here. The easiest thing to do next is I'm just going to turn it on with a single power switch on the front. And it sounds like a machine from the early 2000s. It's got one of those Western digital hard drives in it. It'll even do a post beep. And then as I'm waiting for the video to come up here, it's doing its self-tests. I can't see anything here. The floppy drive's not doing a seek. But then after a couple of moments here, that light goes solid and it begins booting into the operating system. One of the neat things is that even though this is like Sun's low-cost sub-$1,000 machine, this is still a 64-bit operating system. The SPARC 2 in here is still a 64-bit CPU. So that's one of the few things that it still had going for them when the PCs were just kind of beating the crap out of them and outperforming and outpricing them. 64-bit, if you wanted that, it was available. 64-bit on the PC didn't come around really until like the mid-2000s, and that's with like the Core 2. Like you had the Pentium 3, which was beginning to be phased out. The Pentium 4 was coming in. And you had like other CPUs from Intel and AMD, none of which were 64-bit yet. And then you had the Blade 100 here, which was a 64-bit machine. You're going to be noticing here as well, probably, that there's a bunch of errors that are being displayed here. Unix likes to operate around its network functioning properly. I didn't set up DHCP properly. Hint, hint. Don't use DHCP on any Unix machine. It's a complete nightmare. Just use a static IP address. But eventually it'll still boot up all the way, and here we are, the classic CDE login splash screen that's been OEM'd for Sun Microsystems for Solaris 9. The 850 runs CDE as well. CDE, or the Common Desktop Environment, was very common between all of the RISC Unix workstations. Like, to the point where even some of the early Linux X window copies were basically just like minor improvements over CDE itself. It has its charm. It doesn't use a lot of colors to display its windows, but it's still really jank, and I find that by default with a lot of these installs, there's not a lot of software that's installed that's cool and fancy and bonusy. Silicon Graphics is the exception here. Silicon Graphics had been very good at supplying not only demos, but like there was just all the software available that even today I can recognize what it is beyond just Illustrator and Photoshop and Softimage. You could get AutoCAD for this. You could get AutoCAD for any number of other machines. And well, sure, open source software is a solution for this problem. But then again, you do open source software, anything that you compile and run on this will probably compile and run on any other system as well. Okay, so I'll log in here. And we come up, CDE version 1.5. We are using display PostScript in here as well. That was just a thing that Sun was paying licensing on, even if this was cheap. And hello, here we are, the good old CDE desktop. What am I to explain here? Like, if I show you, again, the 850, it's going to look the same. If I show you HPUX, it's going to look the same. Really, the only underlying thing that's different here is that there's software using Java, and that's about it. If I go into our applications, we have our administration stuff. This stuff seems pretty straightforward. There's some stuff I don't understand why it's there. For example, ejecting floppy on a floppy drive that's manual eject. I do have smart card services. At this point here, I'd like to point out, I have the smart card, and if I put the smart card in there, other than just turning a light on, it doesn't care. You have to set up smart card services for that kind of authentication to work. It's not out of the box. Again, it's like Sun was doing really good with their networking and their networked workstations, so they were going to dump a ton of money into that. So the smart card in this case here, we're not using. Now, if I don't exit out of my applications here, we'll go to our desktop applications. And like I said, there's not really a lot for demos or other software included. We have something for synchronizing Palm PDAs because we can. That was a popular thing. Netscape is bundled with this, which is pretty fun, but in this day and age, it's kind of useless because everything's HTTPS, and this version of Netscape will not support HTTPS. So like 95% of the websites you can think of off the top of your head aren't going to load on this. Google kind of loads, but again, like we're missing a bunch of scripting and a bunch of other things, and pretty much nothing now expects Netscape to be working. And of course, like I mentioned before, there's a bunch of jank that's associated with running CDE and the X Windows system. If I do stop A, suddenly you notice here I do have no working mouse, but I also now have type go to resume, and I can do it. I've basically gone down to a prompt. And if I type go again, it doesn't refresh the screen. It does give me this back, but as you can see now, all of my window elements are now corrupted by everything being bumped up by technically one character of console text. I have to minimize it and reopen it, and then that corruption goes away. There, see, it hides like that. So I'm not here to show you all the software that's bundled into Solaris 9 because there's really nothing different between this and, well, just find it yourself. Seriously, there's nothing on here. There's no killer apps. There's nothing. You compiled C code, you compiled code like you hosted files. That was it. But the Sun PCi card was supposed to make this the great transitional leap because not only do you have the hardware of a 64-bit SPARC here, you also have a 32-bit Pentium processor or equivalent in this machine as well. Actually, I believe it's an AMD CPU that's used on the Sun PCi card. Interestingly enough, the software to install it is also just as jank and awful. So I'm going to, if I can remember where it was, I have to open a console. Great. Okay, so we'll go to desktop apps, terminal, and I'll open that up. What was it? LS. Yeah. And it is case sensitive, by the way. Yep. Sun PCi. Oh, what? Yes. See, it is case sensitive. CD, SUNW is uppercase. SPCI. I'm in there. LS. So this is everything. Like the drivers are already loaded. Like everything's been unpacked and set up. I've already created a virtual hard disk on here, so it'll set up and boot. All I have to do is, and I'll hit that. The CPU, there we go. And it's going to open this window here. And now the first thing you'll notice is that, okay, there we go. So one of the downsides here, and again, one of my complaints to being this jank that we keep seeing within the operating system, is that the Windows system, for some reason, if I put my cursor in focus of the Sun PCi window, the graphics corrupt everywhere else outside of it. And if I take my cursor out of it, it inverts. So now that area is corrupted, but the rest of the desktop is totally fine. And it's kind of annoying. But as you can see, it's booting up like a regular PC. It's booting into MS-DOS, but it's not booting into MS-DOS because for some reason they didn't license it. It's running Caldera OpenDOS version 7, which is, well, you know, a DRI thing. So, and everything about here, like all that's fine. And it runs like a PC. Now, of course, to use it like a PC, we have a CD drive and a floppy drive, so we can load stuff into there. We can run Windows, we can run DOS. It's fantastic. Kind of. I'm going to take this floppy disk here, and I'm going to put it into the machine. So, yeah. Here's the situation. I know this floppy drive works because this floppy drive here, I was able to format using the Solaris floppy format utility. And yet, if I try and specify that floppy drive within the Sun PCi, it doesn't work. Well, we can go up to the options. This is really annoying, by the way. I can go up to options, and I have nothing regarding the floppy drive here at all. But I do have the ability to attach a CD-ROM drive, which is interesting. So volume dev aliases CD-ROM 0. I know this CD-ROM drive works because that's how I installed Solaris 9 on this and have to reinstall Solaris 9 again because I broke the networking on it. But if I make that work, it's just like, oh, no such file directory. It doesn't like the CD-ROM drive. It could just be that it doesn't see a CD in there, or it's just not, I'm not sure what's going on there. But it's a little frustrating. So no, we're going to fail that. So neither the floppy drive works, nor the CD drive works. What are our options for configuring? This is still really annoying, I want to point out. So I can reset the PC. That's that. I can attach a hard drive, which is a virtual hard drive, create a new hard drive, which is a virtual hard drive volume, which I might add has permissions on it. So me, as I installed this as root, this is running as root. If someone else tries to run this, they have to run it as root because I screwed up. I can eject the CD-ROM drive. I can attach CD-ROM. I can attach a mouse because I guess I can. But that's it. I don't have any other way to configure this, do I? No. All I have is a utility here to create the disk. Other than that, I'm kind of screwed. I know these products existed for the Macintosh. Orange Micro made some. The Orange PCi cards are great. There's also new bus versions, but we're not talking about that. And even Apple themselves had these PCi, PC compatibility cards, and I love them. They are absolutely fantastic. They have a control panel. You can specify virtual volumes. You can create and destroy virtual volumes. You can specify your mount points for your CD and your floppy. You can allocate how much RAM the system is going to use. You can share other resources. You can even do shared volumes, which is actually a physical volume on your Mac install that shows up as a drive within your compatibility card. This has none of it. I deployed the package, and this is what it is. And I hate it a lot. I've been holding on to the Sun PCi card since 2010. I am completely underwhelmed by just how bad this is. And this was supposed to be like the big bridge from Sun to go from SPARC, Ultra SPARC, to the PC, either for porting or just to run something like Microsoft Office. Because, sure, you have OpenOffice and Star Office that was available for Solaris 9 that wasn't really available for Solaris. Again, this is the thing, like, all the software that's available for these machines that you expect to be on here aren't on here. Okay, so that was a disappointment. I'm just going to close out of that. Sure, I'll exit out of that. That'll stop complaining. I'll close that there. Really, I don't have anything else better to say about this. So the Sunblade 100 is an Ultra SPARC 2 CPU system that uses far more common commodity PC parts. It has this neat PC compatibility card. The hardware looks really nice, and other than a couple of drawbacks, like, it seems like it's fine for what it is. It's a $1,000 machine that you can upgrade in the field, and the software is a complete disappointment. Even the Windows system isn't great, and there's not even Java Desktop that's on here. That's more of a Solaris 10 thing. You can run this normally shipped with Solaris 8. Solaris 9 was also supported. Solaris 10 kind of works on this, but it's really slow. But that's why, if you see on my desktop here, I have a problems text file, which basically reminds me, like, this machine is totally bonk. Other than that, here's CDE. Well, at least on the keyboard I have a power button, which is a crescent moon, which gives me this. I can go to low power mode and puts the system to sleep. A Unix system going to sleep? Sure, let's try that. And all it does is it just kind of spins down the hard drive. I hear the fan, but it is in a low power mode right now. And if I do that, it... Really? Really? Okay, I'm going to have to stop this here because this is absolutely frustrating. Even from still a fairly fresh install, yeah, okay, so apparently it can go to sleep, but when it wakes up, it loses its mind. So you know what? I'm just going to shut it down from here. Really? No, it just goes back to beeping. Can I turn off my caps lock? No. Okay, stop A. Oh my God! Stop it! Power button. Okay, you get the idea. So, this is the Sun Blade 100 low-cost SPARC system from Sun Microsystems. It does have a couple of low-cost cut corners. It does have the very powerful Solaris operating system installed, and it can even do PC compatibility with an additional PCi expansion board. Other than that, however, it's your typical Unix problems with a RISC workstation that you expected in the 1990s, transitioning over to the 2000s. Not long after this, Sun began producing products that were Intel-based. Solaris 10 was available with x86 binaries, and, well, by the end of the decade, Sun Microsystems wouldn't exist at all. It would become Oracle. And that was the end of it. Do I like this machine? It looks pretty. Like I said at the beginning of this video, all RISC workstations did a very good job making their systems look really, really pretty. But the software is terrible. I hope I've beat that into you at this point now, that that's just the way it is. And I hope you did enjoy this, both with the walk around and tour of the machine and the attempted test of the Sun PCi board. And if you like what you saw, please leave a comment down below. If there was something you did with Solaris that wasn't just hosting servers, like actual programs like CAD and stuff like that, leave your story down in the comments if you can as well. But until next time, have a good one.